It's easier for me than it is for you because I don't debate it with myself. It's not up for discussion between myself and myself. I don't have that debate. I just go do it.
No fake shit against me shall prosper. Yes, I came, I saw, I conquered. No fake.
I took this from an old school cartoon. It said, "I'm not a procrastinator. I just prefer doing all my work in a deadline-induced panic."
Right.
You know? And it's true. I've always kind of taken some pride in being a procrastinator in school. When I went to college, I mean, it would be the last minute, getting everything done last minute. And I felt like it put me in a better position to succeed, be more creative, especially with this job where there's a lot of creative demands here. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to kind of, I don't know, you almost have to put yourself in a little bit of bind. I know you kind of disagree with that, but you do also see some benefits to procrastinating.
Well, so I agree and I disagree. But first of all, I can relate, and I think everybody can relate. Everybody has a tendency to procrastinate. Why is it that there's so many things that we want to do, things we want to accomplish, but we put it off, and we put it off for later, till tomorrow, till next week, till next month, and that turns into next year. And this all kind of gets lumped together in the same category of motivation, but I really think that they're all individual pieces, but they all still work together. And it's everything else that we've been talking about in these past podcasts, which ultimately means, how do you accomplish your goals? When it comes to procrastination, I was a terrible procrastinator. And like you, I almost thrived in that environment because I would wait until the last minute. If my teacher gave me an assignment and I had 2 months to work on it, I wouldn't work on it for 2 months. I would do it in the last 2 days, and then it would be a big panic. And I would justify it by saying that I work well under pressure, that that's where I perform my best. What I would say is that what you're really doing is you're creating a sense of urgency for yourself. When you have 2 months, you don't feel that sense of urgency, right? And that's one of the keys to accomplishing your goals, is that ability to create a sense of urgency for yourself. Because if you look at, you and I've talked about this before, if you look at, say, in a work environment, if your boss gives you an assignment and gives you a deadline, well, there's a sense of urgency because he's created the deadline for you. It's easy to get things done when someone else creates a deadline for us. And I always say that that's the most important part, or at least one of the critical parts of goal setting, is you have to clearly define what your goal is, and then you have to create a deadline for yourself. Because without a deadline, you're never going to have that sense of urgency to go ahead and do it. Like, even, here's a good example. We live in South Florida. We're a mile from the beach. Actually, where you live and where I live, you can walk right to the beach.
Exactly.
How often do you go to the beach?
Not often enough.
Not often. Neither do I. We live right here. Now, why is it that when someone comes here on vacation, besides the fact that it's new, but why is it that they go see every single attraction there is in South Florida, and when we don't? Why is it that you go to New York? How many New Yorkers have never been to the top of the Empire State Building? They've never gone to the Statue of Liberty. They never do all the things that tourists do. And I've always wondered that. And I think one of the things is there's no sense of urgency. You live there, it's at your disposal. You figure, hey, someday I'll get around to it. But if you're there for 3 days, man, you try to squeeze it all in. You have a sense of urgency. You're like, I know I'm only here for a short period of time. Let me get all this stuff done. Mm-hmm. So creating a sense of urgency is extremely important. The problem is most of us struggle with that. If it's a self-imposed deadline and no one else is monitoring it, well, then it's pretty easy to break it, right? Who's going to follow up? What are the consequences of you breaking your own deadline?
How do you motivate yourself then? That's the kind of the question. Okay, you can give me a task. Hey, Dennis, we have this product coming out. You have 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get it done. But what if I have my own business or my own fitness goal? How do I even motivate myself to get that done?
So that's the big problem. It goes back to the example I gave with travel, going and visiting places. It's the fact that we feel that we have an abundance of time. There is no sense of urgency there. So you have to be able to create a sense of urgency for yourself. Now, the way I do it is actually, I guess this is kind of going into more of a philosophical conversation, but I literally live my life reminding myself, and it's just not natural. I have to remind myself all the time that time is limited. You don't know how much time you have, and we all know that, right? We all know that someday we're not going to be here anymore. but you don't know what's even going to happen tomorrow. I mean, even when I got into that car accident years ago, that was a good reminder for me. Was it life-changing? Yeah, in some ways, but it was a wake-up call, and it did change my mindset after that, make every day count. But I remind myself of that all the time. Look, they say even from a biological standpoint that from 0 to 18, we're growing, right? Once you reach 18, they say that's pretty much when you stop growing. But it's not just about growing, it's about aging. From 0 to 18, the number of new cells outnumber the amount of dying cells. From 18 to 25, there's a balance between the amount of new cells, right, and dying cells. So guess what happens after 25?
The dying cells start.
The dying cells start to outnumber the new cells. So what does that really mean in a philosophical way? That means that we're dying every day. Like everything in life, there's a fine balance, right? You do need that a little bit of sense of pressure, a little bit of sense of stress. A little bit of stress is a good thing, too much is not. I had a tendency to err on too much stress. Stress is an energy. That's a source of fuel, and I think anyone who's really operated in an environment that's really stressful and they really found themselves, really on the go all the time can relate to this. You can tap into that, and you can tap into that stress, and you find yourself very, very productive, but at the same time, you can also wear yourself out. So, there is no perfect answer. Do I like that pressure? Do I like performing under pressure? Of course I do. Of course I do. But if you find yourself never accomplishing your goals, never starting the things that you need to start in order to go where you want to go, then that's on the other side. Right? So I guess that's the ultimate question. Are you accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish? Are you achieving all your goals that you have for yourself in life? Because what you're talking about, whether it's speeches, all these other things, those have a deadline built in. And that's the difference. Going back to what we talked about in the very beginning.
There's still a deadline.
There's a deadline built in. So the difference is when it's a self-imposed deadline, and no one's going to bust your balls if you don't do it, right? It's easy for you to go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to put it off for tomorrow. And that's that accountability to yourself. So that's probably the biggest difference there. So that's why I've always picked goals, and I've attached them to things that have a date to where I can't back out of it. So for example, here recently with some of the stuff that I was doing, I was working on the car, I was doing this whole road trip. And so some of my fitness goals took a little bit of a backseat. I was still going to the gym and I was still eating healthy, but it really wasn't a priority of focus. And so now that back on track, I want to, get back in the gym and have some intensity and create a goal for myself. So I needed to find something that had a definitive deadline. So, I had a friend of mine reach out. His name's Terry Friendo. He owns Inside Fitness Magazine up in Canada. They're distributed also in Australia and South Africa. He said, hey, you want a goal? He's like, let's do another cover shoot.
Right.
I'm going to be down in South Florida December 15th. Right? So now there's a hard deadline. So now it's not, hey, I just want to get in shape and I have an unlimited amount of time to do it. No, I've got to do it by a set deadline, and it's not a deadline that I've created for myself. So you got to find some way to hold yourself accountable, create a deadline. And, even if it's just making it publicly known, you let all your family and friends. So if nothing else, there's egg on your face if you don't do it. Your friends say, hey, what happened? I thought you were going to do it by this date.
What is the real reason procrastinators procrastinate, you think?
I think there's all sorts of different reasons, and I think to every individual, everyone has their own reasons. Sometimes it's fear. Fear is a big one. Fear that you won't know how to do it, you won't be good enough to do it. Whatever it is, there's a lot of reasons, and you kind of have to do some soul searching on that and ask yourself, what is it that's really stopping you? Sometimes it's just the fact that, hey, we're tired. We got so many different things going on, and, feel like you can only juggle so many things. That goes back to priorities, right? So maybe you have to rearrange your priorities. What are the things that are taking up your time and energy? And say, are there things in my life right now that really aren't that important? That are taking up my time and energy away from things that are more important to me. And there's a lot of stuff like that. I mean, look at social media. It's a time suck. I don't care what anyone says. I haven't looked at statistics, but I bet you they'd be staggering. If you looked at the amount of time that we look on our phone, forget text messaging or emails. Forget that. Just look at social media platforms and the fact that we check it, God, I mean, some people probably check their social media platforms 100 times a day plus. Add up all that time. That's time that you could be doing something else. So here's what I would say. This all goes back to everything else that we've talked about. Obviously, you have to set a very clear goal for yourself. And what we just talked about in this conversation, it has to be a high enough priority for you. So set that bigger goal and then set a definitive timeline. Something where, you're holding yourself accountable to that deadline, where there's no backing out. And it has to be a must, not a want. You have to say that I am going to do this no matter what by this deadline. And then it's breaking it down into smaller things like we always talk about. And each of those small things are one piece of the bigger puzzle that's going to take you there. And actually, what you just said is very true. There's this tendency that we have to talk ourselves in or out of things, right? It's like if we sit there in the morning, if our alarm goes off and we hit snooze, we talk ourselves into why we should stay in bed or why we should get out of bed. And if you sit there and have that debate, there's a good chance you're going to lose the debate and you're going to hit your snooze bar probably 6 times. So it's got to be one of those things that before you even get into this debate, as soon as it comes up, you just jump up. You just got to jump up. And it's almost like a countdown, like 3, 2, 1, and you just hop out of bed. You just can't debate this stuff. People ask me about my level of motivation for going to the gym, and I told you last week it's easier for me than it is for you because I don't debate it with myself. It's not up for discussion between myself and myself. I don't have that debate. I just go do it. And it's just, it's got to be like clockwork. So that's big. That's one of the big things is, don't give yourself that opportunity to talk yourself out of it. So that's more of the immediate thing. So like I said, bigger goal, create a deadline for yourself, break that goal down into smaller things that you can do daily and things that you can even do hourly, and then just do them.
I think we talked about that last week. Instead of setting the A to Z, which looks monumental,
it's overwhelming.
A, B, C, D, each step it out.
Break it down into as small steps as you can and take satisfaction in crossing those things off the list. That creates that momentum that we talked about. That's rewarding. It feels good, reinforces that good behavior, and you're going to keep doing it. So it's, we're really a byproduct of our habits, of our routine, of our consistent actions. And so you just have to break it down into those small things. But if it's this big monumental task there, it's too easy to say, oh, God, I don't even know where to start. It's overwhelming. And then it's easy to push that off. And I think you asked why a lot of people procrastinate. I think a lot of times they just feel overwhelmed. I think looking at that bigger goal and how to go about it just feels overwhelming.
I think that's probably my main reason. It's not that I'm, scared of it or anything. It's just like, I'm going to have to start this arduous journey.
So let's break it down to something with the gym. So let's say you want to lose 30 pounds and you set this deadline for yourself. You're going to do it, reach your goal in 90 days, and you set a realistic goal for yourself. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to have to go out into the gym every single day. Well, even sometimes just going into the gym seems overwhelming, and it's easy to put that off and say, well, I'm going to skip today, I'll go tomorrow. So here's what I do. I kind of play a little trick on myself. I'll say, I'm just going to go into the gym. That's step 1. Let me just walk out there. Let me get to the gym. And when I get to the gym, I'm going to do 1 set. And when I do 1 set and I finish it, it's easy to go ahead and say, hey, let me go ahead and do another set. And let me do another set.
I'm already here. Why not?
You can even approach it rep by rep. Say, hey, I'm just going to go out into the gym and I'm going to do 1 rep. And 1 rep turns into 10 reps. 10 reps turns into 3 sets.
Yep.
3 sets turns into a full workout. And day by day, that's how you're going to accomplish your goals. So stop looking at the big picture. Yes, set the big picture, the big goal. You set your sights on that. That gives you direction. But you're going to accomplish it day by day, small task by small task.